So we're talking about web user experience in 2021. If that's not what you were expecting, there are other great sessions in other places, but let's go ahead and dive into it. So briefly, a little bit about me. I've been in this industry for quite some time, and through that time I've had a variety of different perspectives. I started off as a developer many years ago, 15, 20 years ago. Started growing a company that eventually turned me into more of a CEO management type person. Eventually built a product. That product was then bought by Pantheon, and now I do outreach for Pantheon. So I've had a lot of different perspectives in the industry. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm at dgorton. That's my email address. And I'm going to encourage this hashtag discussion to be about future web. Because, and that's enough about me. This talk for me started about a year and a half ago, so I was really kind of thinking through a lot of things about my future and the future of this industry. And a lot of what I'm doing is just presenting my synthesis of things I have been reading for a very long time. As I was thinking ahead about what, where is all this technology taking us? What does this future look like? Am I going to be employable in 5 years? Those kinds of questions. I really wanted to dive in. So what I'm presenting, and I'm giving quotes throughout and sort of reference points and things for folks to go out and check, these sources and such. But I would encourage all of us to have a conversation about it, because here I'm sort of daring to stand up and say I know the future, hopefully with the appropriate amount of humility, but I know there's a lot of smart, talented people in this room as well, and I think, again, like a dialogue on Twitter, or which can then turn into a bigger, better dialogue elsewhere, is something I would very much welcome. So I'm suggesting the hashtag of future web. And the 3-minute version, if you want to just take this right now and then scamper off to another session, is that the world is getting more webbish. The world is becoming more interconnected in ways that are going to be almost magical. At the same time, what we think of as the web is getting less webbish. A little less about moving pixels around on screens, the thing that we've been doing primarily for 20-ish years. There is a lot of change coming, and that can be alarming, but I think the short version is that actually connects to a lot of opportunity for us, because we understand how a connected world and a connected systems work. So with that, the intuition that we've honed over the last, again, 10, 15, 5, however many years you've been doing this, we get how this goes. And so I think opportunity really abounds. So that's the 3-minute version. You're free to go to another session. I'll keep talking though. So I'm going to be talking about things starting at a very low level. So hardware is where I'm starting, which is a long ways away from the web, but I think it actually trickles up or flows forward in a very interesting way. Interfaces, changes in software, some changes in open web, and with big data. And with each of these topics, I'm going to be talking about just so giving people points of awareness, like what's going on, and what I think will happen, some possible outcomes, and so things I'm going to suggest that you should do today to start honing your skills to be ready for these things that will be coming. Despite the fact that I have the word user experience in the title, it's possibly naming things is hard. I'm not talking about UI design techniques or user experience sort of processes, etc., content strategy, other good, great topics. That's not at all what I'll be covering. So again, if you're expecting those things, again, lots of great sessions here. Go find it. So with each of these forces, hardware, software, interface, etc., I'm going to talk about, again, what's happening. I'm going to give an analogy and an example that I think is relevant. And some predictions, and again, things to do to get ready now. But before we get going, I want to just point out that predicting the future can be hard. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit. So, Thomas Edison, someone we might all know and recognize as somebody who had at least some foresight, in 1889 said that alternating current was dead, nonstop. There was no future in it. Alternating current is, of course, the thing that we all use all the time right now. In 1955, moving forward about 50 years, this Alex was the CEO of a vacuum cleaner company. In 1955, he thought that there would be nuclear-powered vacuum cleaners by 1965. That did not happen. Closer forward in time, 1977, this looks a little bit more like our industry. The chairman of the Digital Equipment Corporation, now known as DEC, thought that there was absolutely no case whatsoever for anyone to have a personal computer. Somewhat incorrect in that assessment. Even closer, 1995, co-founder of 3Com and inventor of Ethernet, like the cords that we all used to use back before we had Wi-Fi and still occasionally do use. In 1995, he thought that it was all up in 1996. No more internet, game over, we can't sustain this. And of course, a little bit more famously, some of us might remember this as it happened, Steve Ballmer saying, iPhone, dumb, not happening. Similarly, it is highly likely that at least one of the things that I think will happen will not happen. So please, appropriate grains of salt. And the last thing I want to talk about in sort of preparation for the talk is that I'm giving analogies. And this is what Freud thought of analogies. They might be fun, but probably not that useful. So we are caveat emptor. We're going in. So hardware in 2021. Hardware is slowing. This has already started. This is not controversial. And very particularly, the thing called Moore's Law, which should never have been called a law, is broken. A law is supposed to mean something different, like in physics and other things. And Moore's Law is the principle that every 2 years, speeds will double. So we've lived on this premise for 20, 30 years, and it's changed everything that we do. And we build like product life cycles around this. The fact that you can now, in your phone have more computing power than what was on the moon missions and such. Like, we all hear these analogies, we know them. This is not going to be the case going forward. We will no longer have this unending acceleration. And there are two reasons for this, at least two reasons for them. One of them is physics, and it's sort of the easy reason. Right now, we're dealing at about the 20 nanometer scale, and we're headed to 10. So right now, the level of computes is at 20 nanometers. That's where the things are happening. 10 is the next doubling. It's in progress. It's being a little bit slower than we anticipated. At 5, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle takes over, which means you don't know where the things are. And if you're trying to design a binary system, we all know computers, ones and zeros. If you don't know it's a 1 or a 0, fundamental problem. So at 5, our ability to design chips simply is no longer there. We're within the margin of error. So that's physics, but then you should start to say, well, quantum computing, I've been reading about that, or new alloys with silicon, other things. There are some interesting developments happening, but I think the other reason that this is true is that we are rapidly arriving at the point of good enough. So this analogy comes to us by way of, let's see if I can say it, Maciej Zagłowski, who gave a talk in 2014 at a conference called WebStock. And he made the analogy to airplanes. And I think it's quite apropos. So in the 1920s, so flight was young, new planes were coming out, new distances, and about every 10 years or so, the DC-3, the DC-5, like the new versions of planes were coming out and stretching distances and capacity at about double-ish, very regularly. Every 10 years, very clear that planes would go further and further and carry more and more while doing it, and do it faster as well. And it got to the point that Pan Am, who was the first airline to cross, I believe, the Atlantic, I think certainly the Pacific, a whole ton of milestones. They, like first cross America, etc. They had a huge number of firsts. It was very obvious that Pan Am's next first was going to be to the moon. That was clearly, this is 1960s, by 1970s, we're going to be able to fly to the moon. And so they actually started selling tickets, selling membership in a club, the Moon Club, that you could just sign up for. And here we see that this is Etta's certificate from Pan Am saying, when we finally have this ready to go, your number 1, 2, 3, 5, 4 on the list. Congratulations, it's a fantastic future. This didn't happen, right? The next generation, at the point at which we were ready to make that next technological leap, everyone was working on supersonic technology. The Boeing, as well as the Concorde effort, Concorde actually made it, but this project of designing the next generation of air flight was starting to stretch out, going a little bit over budget, going a little bit over time. I don't know if anybody's ever been on a project like that, but this was happening, and it started causing panic as year after year after year of we're still not ready. What they did is they took the not very good engineers, still like airplane engineers. They took those folks and they said, you know what? We need the stopgap, and they designed the 737. And this bad news bears teams of engineers designed the airplane that all of us basically still fly today. It's become the 747 and so on, but it's basically the same thing. You can still fly a 737 today in the world, and it's not that different. And I think the same is true for hardware. We have, again, there's so much invested in the infrastructure of producing chips that the momentum behind that is sufficient. Like the current architectures that we have are good enough for us to be able to go ahead and browse cat pictures on the internet. Our obsession with doubling speed is no longer going to be the thing that drives forth innovation in that industry. What will happen is that there will be much more specialized architectures happening. So CPUs, we probably know that, central processing units. GPUs is a little bit more, perhaps they're newer for graphics sort of capacity. There will be more specialization in the types of chips, but we're going to be solving for different problems. Those of efficiency, connectivity between devices in special ways, power consumption, etc. So as we have an ecosystem of specialized chips coming out that do very specialized things, this trend will accelerate the adoption of what's known as the Internet of Things, IoT as it's often abbreviated. So as this happens, so this is again, this is a long ways away from where we work, designing websites, building websites, planning websites. But what we're going to see in the future is a world that is much more deeply interconnected. Many more things will have chips embedded to them that talk to other things. So this is what I mean when I say the world is getting more webbish. How many of us, I'm just curious, how many of us here have at least one internet-connected device with them today in this room? That's all of us, right? All right, so the next question. How many of us have at least two? That's, for the record, that's almost everyone in the room, except for me, then some others smiling. How many of us have 3 or more? Cool. I'm going to say I have a Kindle. Does that make anyone else realize suddenly you have another thing? I don't know. I have done this in larger rooms and seen 4 or more, and then myself remembered I had yet another device. Does anyone here have a Fitbit? Right. Or other watch-connected device? The idea, say 10 years ago, certainly 10 years ago, maybe even as recently as 5 years ago, to witness this kind of response to 4, 3, 5 devices that are connected to the internet that's just sort of mind-blowing. Or connected to each other and then connected to the internet. This is not slowing down. In fact, it is accelerating. And especially as chips become much more disposable and readily available, there will be more devices. But with this interconnected world, again, if we think of ourselves, jumping ahead a little ways, as people who design systems that talk to each other and help humans communicate and solve problems, if we think of ourselves as of all the professions in the world that exist, the one that does that the most, we have a lot of opportunity. If we think of ourselves as people who focus on just this little narrow spectrum, increasingly I think narrow spectrum of what we think of as the web, from 5 years ago or even now today, it's different. So that's a lot of change. I'll be talking about more change. But I think fundamentally, the thing I would like us to know, though, is we should be optimistic about that. There's a lot of opportunity in this, actually. And so I'll be describing a lot of change, but hopefully we can emerge feeling empowered, because I think there are reasons for that. As hardware items multiply, so do interfaces. And they also spread out, right? So right now, most of us experience things digital via an item with a screen. That is probably our most common way of experiencing something that we quote unquote think of as digital. But that is not going to be the ubiquitous, unanimous sort of thing of the future. Audible interfaces, talking to your computer. How many of us use Siri or similar equivalents on a regular basis? Right. It's handy. It's nice. Those interfaces are going to get better and better. Using visual overlays on the world, or so-called augmented reality, or AR, again, going to be much more common. And of course, APIs everywhere. So I want to talk about an example of this. So augmented reality is the idea that, again, there's this sort of like digital overlay on the world. And how many, is anyone familiar with what this is? This is Pokemon. Does anybody here play with this or try this when it came out? I certainly did as well. I still enjoy it. I think it's like an intellectual thing. I think it's a very interesting early experience in what augmented reality is. And by augmented reality, I'm going to get a digital overlay of the world. Now I'm going to describe this. This was a big sensation of 3 or 4 months ago. Certainly people walking around doing Pokemon, and what happens with this is you hold your device and you walk around and you see, walking down the sidewalk, a Nidorino, which happens to be CP57. And then you try to catch it. And then you keep walking. And while you're out walking your dog or doing whatever, suddenly the world has another layer of information presented to us. And right now that experience is a little bit clunky, because you're picking up a phone and moving it around, but that will not be the end all of this experience. And I think it's a really interesting early moment in time to recognize, I think this is like the day it started becoming a little bit more normal. Google Glass came out 3, 4, 5 years ago. There was a backlash against it. They shut it down. It will not be the last example of Google Glass or similar technology. It will get better. And there won't be as much backlash because we'll be used to these kinds of things. They're going to be trickling in more and more. And so this obviously is this is just an entertainment, right? Maybe it helps you walk a little bit extra because you take an extra little detour over there to get the Nidorino or whatever. But there will be many more applications that are, so medical, for example, a surgeon doing something, maybe wearing goggles, and detects, see some characteristic of a vein or an artery, and that could be noted and sent through to the anesthesiologist, for example, or some sort of heads up, you should be aware this might be an indicator of a certain kind of condition, or other things. That's obviously sort of like a life-saving instance, but there are many, many other instances of this where it will be just very useful, and this technology will become mainstream. And so things that are location and context aware and very task-oriented, again, like this augmented reality overlay, will become quite normal. I have an example also here that I'm going to end up narrating because we don't have an audio system. But this is actually something that Dries, founder of Drupal, shared in a keynote in New Orleans at what we call in Drupal a Dries note. But it's a really great example, and so for those of you who may not have seen it already, I'm going to play it again. And I'm going to try and narrate because the audio is unfortunately simply playing right here. So this is Dries saying, he's talking to Alexa. Alexa, I'm looking for the nearest grocery store. And he gives his zip code, and it says, I see the nearest fruit and vegetable store is blah, 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 blah. And he says, great, how much are apples? And it says, apples are on sale for a certain amount of time. I'm not narrating fast enough. It's better not to narrate this stuff. Sorry. I'll try to do it quicker. says these things, where's the market, what's on sale, comes back. In a moment he's going to ask, is awesome sauce on sale? And Alexa says no. This is Amazon's Alexa voice interface. Then he says, okay, well let me know when it happens. And then it says, sure, tell me your phone number. In the real world, it would know his phone number probably. Then he's going to give his phone number. All right, and then what happens here is, this is actual real stuff today. There is a call going out from Alexa to a Drupal website that powers this market. And it says, hey, fires off some API calls. I want to know when things are on sale. Alexa says, it's not on sale right now. But, all right, so let me know you win. I'll tell you when it goes on. Here's his phone number. It's not his actual phone number in case anybody's tempted. I was sort of mischievously tempted when I first saw this, but it's not his real phone number. And now, at the market, somebody goes into a Drupal admin screen and says, awesome sauce, let's make it on sale. Click save. Alexa notifies customer on phone. Priest, you should know your awesome sauce is on sale. That is a website. How many of us have designed with that website in mind? I think that's a really interesting example. If we think of ourselves as people who are about moving, again, pixels on screens, what is this? But if we think about ourselves as people who are, again, facilitating communication through a whole variety of devices, not just iPhone and Android of various sizes, we have many, many opportunities before us. With this proliferation of interfaces and devices, though, what do we like? Whoa, yikes! But we've seen this before. Our first forays into the mobile world, we would often see people selling, building, etc., solutions that were, hey, mobile's really hard. We're going to go ahead and make you a mobile-friendly website. And they would make another whole thing, another whole application. And this is a screenshot from 2014 from the American Airlines mobile app, which you could dive down deep enough in a particular menu for help, and it said, oh, yeah, we never copied this page over. Please go to the main website. You'll get your help there. Which no doubt redirected them back saying, hey, you're on a mobile device. Can I send you back? Two systems is always worse than one. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, much more so. So I think in this future world, the idea of the hub, the central hub, is even more important. And happily, this is actually a good place for Drupal. Drupal does a good job of being able to push content out into multiple ways. We understand structured content very well, and that gives us a lot of opportunity in this world. With this, multi-channel delivery will be really, really common. So things will be going out to web, to apps, into overlays, and other things as well, into audible interfaces. Again, this is sort of a natural evolution. Okay, what to do about that? As we think ahead to a world which has many more interfaces, one of the things I can recommend that you start doing today is using headless Drupal, the sort of quote-unquote headless Drupal, which I think is a term of the industry at this point in time. If you're not familiar with that term, Google it, start reading. Think about it, it's the idea that Drupal is the place where you administer your content and something else consumes it. Might be a Drupal, might be a React app, might be an iPhone app, might be something else. If you are not doing integrations and APIs with your projects, you should be doing them. They should be sort of like normal course of business. And building web applications. So getting your content elsewhere and building the discipline of skills today that allow you to just shine in that world off in the future is really valuable. So if you've already started doing these kinds of things, double down, do more of it. And if you haven't, it's okay. The future is not yet here. but it's time to start moving in this direction and building these skills. So software in 2021. As all of this sort of proliferates, software will as well. Cloud, we've been talking about cloud forever. It's actually starting to happen, and it soon will be the normal thing. Software as a service will increase, and services will be commoditized. And actually, for an example of this, I want to just talk through a situation from my own life. I happen to live in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and there is an awesome Thai restaurant near where I live. If you ever happen to make it there, highly recommend it. Google, in fact, is giving it 4.5 stars. Pretty good. I like it as well. If you Google for this place, at least when you're physically located in Minneapolis, top result is this website over here. Also in page is this stuff on the right. On the left-hand side, we see a nice picture of a table with a napkin. There's a phone number at the top, some navigation, and presumably you can scroll and or click to find out more. On the right-hand side, I see the name, I see ratings, I see some pictures, I see a map. I see that they're open right now. I know popular times, popular things. I can see some of the dishes submitted by people. That interface is very nice. It's very convenient. I can get to information quickly. I know where they are. I know the map. Whatever restaurant I'm looking at is in the upper right, etc. This, however, is alarming for those of us who are in the business of building that. Right? And so I think to the extent that we are in the business, so this is what I'm saying by services being commoditized. To the extent that any of us is in the business of building websites for Thai Curry House and others like it, this is alarming. And it's a trend that's happening. Google's already added things that have wiped out other kinds of service providers by adding new things to the interface. And so I think what we need to do need to be aware of, is that moving forward, increasingly shallow, quote-unquote, projects have less value. So if you're just building the website for that restaurant, over time, there is nothing, say, for right now, this moment, that prevents Google from creating restaurants.google.com, having a form there, allowing a restaurant to type in basic information, upload a few pictures, do some sort of verification, and boom, it's posted. They already invented Google Forms. They've already got the display there. There's nothing that prevents that from happening tomorrow. Now, on our side, we have the fact that, say, Facebook and Apple and some other folks like that might want that information as well, and so they're sort of counterbalancing forces, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, it could happen tomorrow, and if your business is building restaurant websites, which probably, it's hyper-specifics, probably no one in this room, but if you think about your own clients in this way, and you think about what kinds of things are they doing that are really common, common solutions will become very highly commoditized. And so shallow projects will have less value. And I think another thing that will happen in the future that's on a different aspect is that I think search and social, as we recognize the power of search and social to sort of shape economics, politics, and other things like that, there will eventually be regulations around these industries, actually. So, and I think very specifically related to politics. Knowing that Facebook could impact an election, or knowing that Google's search results could skew the way a particular district votes. Governments, does anybody here work with government clients or work in government by any chance? Yes, right, yeah. So my company, before I was with Pantheon, and certainly Pantheon as well, has government clients, they might be occasionally described as slow or ponderous. It's not a very fast-moving industry, but I think when under threat, politicians act quickly. And I think knowing that this actually does shape the way, shape behavior, search and social, I think will lead to regulation that increasingly looks like your formulas must be inspectable by some sort of public body. So anyways, as shallow projects lose value, deep projects gain value. So if you're in a commoditizable industry, I would say either get out or go deep. And so an example, so if we follow this restaurant example forward, if you help restaurants, if you, instead of focusing on their websites, you help them focus on demand, or build mobile apps that really facilitate walking by, smelling good food and being able to order, for example, or ordering supplies or other things like that, where you're really getting to know this audience and building more than their website, again, talking to other systems and such. Now, suddenly, you have a very powerful kind of set of tools and valuable things that you're building for clients. So, specializing in finding a niche and understanding it deeply will increasingly have many, many opportunities going forward. So, related to the thread I was just talking about, where that of search and social being regulated, the open web in 2021 is a concept that many of us have been thinking about recently. And the open web is the idea that once upon a time, the web was, to just jump ahead, the web was all of these little dots. All of these little websites, and we would go, I would spend a little time on this website, we'd go to this website, go to this website, go to this website, go to this website. But increasingly what has happened over the last 5 years is that these walled gardens, quote unquote, have been growing up. Facebook, where you now go browse your Facebook feed, or Apple, or Amazon, or Google, all of these giants increasingly consuming content, trying to present it to you in their environment, hold you there, present their advertising to you, show you what they think is relevant to you. And this is, I think, rightly understood as a threat to the open web. I believe that the open web will win. Even though it's like maybe in a dark spot at the moment. As we see, like you can read many posts from many well-respected people on this topic about right now is a moment in the open web. I think the open web will win because I think, again, looking back to an analogy from our past, for those of us who have done this for a long time, once upon a time we had two other giants warring for control of the internet. They were called Microsoft and Netscape. One no longer exists and the other one kind of, I think. 1998 was sort of the height of that, right? We as an industry were fed up with it. This is ridiculous. We can't keep producing the Internet Explorer copy of the website and the Netscape copy of the website. It's stupid. Let's band together, let's have standards. And interestingly enough, as Internet Explorer started to pull ahead, Netscape jumped on board, and they'd been offenders as much as anyone else. And they said, hey, Internet Explorer, you're not following standards. And because we had created space for standards, it gave something for Netscape to jump into. And I think the existing web really is that open web really is that set of standards. And I think if Google goes too far ahead, if they create restaurants.google.com, Facebook will very quickly jump on board our bandwagon and say, hey, we all need access to this information. We all need to have this. Google, terrible people, and if Facebook does it first, Google will say, hey, open web, you need to make sure that this is shareable for all. It will, there'll be turmoil in that process, but that's the way I think it shakes out. So again, the open web will see the losers ganging up on the winner, quote unquote. I also think this means today for those of us who building things, we've seen a series of proprietary formats coming out. AMP from Google, Accelerated Mobile Pages. Facebook's version of the same was Facebook Instant Articles, FIA. There will be more of these as these sort of giants sort of increasingly want to push the optimized format for their services and their users. And I would say that it's okay to know about these things, it's okay to play with them, but I would say it's not the thing that we need to rush to implement right away. I think we don't need to sweat it too much. Now, if you can, like some friends of ours in your community, be paid by Google to build the module for Drupal that does accelerated mobile pages, well done. Like, if there is work there to go ahead and try something, fantastic. But I don't think that we, as an industry, need to jump too quickly for things that are these proprietary formats that are being suggested by each of these giants. Just be cautious of things that are single vendor only solutions. However, try them out. Get a feel for them. But I don't think long term that they're a massive part of our ecosystem. So I would say, what to do. Additionally, sort of awareness. The open web is the web that we work in. And as you sort of just are out there in the world, I would say, encourage you to be aware of this as a trend and a thing that's happening, and support an open web movement as it emerges, and it is. Closely related to the open web is the idea of big data. So big data is something we probably all know what that term means. As we move through the internet, we're leaving wakes, data trails of information accumulating in our activities. And I think it's very interesting. I think Clay Shirky gives a talk about how GitHub is a really interesting model for democracies to succeed. And it's a great TED talk and something well worth watching. And I think as open source practitioners, we've done a really good job thinking about our code and how to collaborate on open source our code. But I don't think we anticipated how much the data, the stuff, so we've got PHP figured out, and we've got JavaScript and sharing that and visibility into that. But the stuff that gets stuck in the database, the MySQL end of things, and the equivalents throughout the world, is not a place we've paid a lot of attention. And that's what big data is about. I think moving forward, we are going to see more and more big data leaks. So, in 2013, 3 years ago, Edward Snowden came out, revealed the fact that our government was doing some pretty horrendous amounts of data collection and spying and such. The United States government is not the only organization on earth accumulating and sifting through egregious amounts of information. And I think there will be more alarming reveals in this field going forward. Facebook and or Google and or Amazon and or other governments, it will happen. And what is already happening in the world, the European Union in general is ahead of the United States and other parts of the world in mandating data protection and data privacy. And actually just this summer, as I was sort of preparing to give this talk for the first time, thinking I was forecasting the future brilliantly, the European Union jumped on and said, correctly, I believe, that everyone has the right to the protection of personal data. This is something that will gain traction around the world as we see more and more releases. And whether or not they come from Snowden's or from data breaches, we will see more and more understanding that this is not an acceptable way to do things. And this is an awesome visualization from a site called Information is Beautiful. It's Information is Beautiful, world's biggest data breaches. And as I know it's a little bit far out there, so I'll read off some of the things that we're looking over on the left-hand side. We've got the years, so it's 2015 at the bottom, latest up at the top. And the subtitle of this slide is Selected Losses Greater Than 30,000 Records. MySpace, who I didn't know was still a thing, 164 million records recently. Voter database, 191 million. Philippines Commission on Elections, 55 million. Clinton campaign, recently, famously, doesn't have a number, but Minecraft, all of these things are being, and we know this, we read about these things, it's no longer surprising. How many of us have had at least one situation in our lives where someone, say maybe Target, has mailed you and said, I'm so sorry, we're so sorry, your data was taken, but you get free credit counseling or services for the next 2 years, right? Like, has that happened to everyone at this point in time? Probably, not yet. The European Union, good stuff. Increasingly, that's the world we live in, and I don't think we'll stand for it. So, what to do about that? That's sort of like a big global force. We're not all maybe building sites with 30 million, 100 million, 50 million records. Short version is like, educate yourself on security. Hackers aren't after only those sites. They are after all of our sites, and they use these as tools and such. So the more you can educate yourself on what is happening right now today on web security and privacy, that's a place to differentiate yourself in the market. And as you build expertise in these skills, this is going to be much more sought after. People will be asking about it more. People will be demanding it more from people like us who provide websites and connected kinds of services. Get educated on what personally identifiable information means. It's not just credit cards. So the value of a credit card on the sort of dark net is between $5 and $30, depending on situation, how recently it was acquired, et cetera, et cetera. The value of information that you can use to falsify medical records is at least 10 times more valuable. $200, $300, $400, $500. And you can use it. You can take addresses and other pieces of information that you can use to cobble together an actual profile, and that is considerably more valuable. It's not just about credit cards. So get educated on what personally identifiable information means and how to protect it. And support data privacy standards like the EU's as they emerge. For those, we're moving into an election season here in the United States. Make our voices heard. Make your voices heard. If this is something that is important to you, make sure that your representatives know about this. They need our help. Whew. So, the web in 2021. I think the web is less special in 2021. The web is winning, kind of like open source one. Now what? It's just regular, it's just normal, right? This way of doing things in an interconnected world is just regular. We just always connect. We just always do these things. We always carry around 4 devices that are connected to the internet. We're always on, connecting in various ways to all kinds of different sources. The web's just one of them. However, we know how to work in this environment. We deeply understand an interconnected world model. And we have the ability, we know how to assemble around causes. Here we are, open source and Drupal. We know how to bring ourselves together, organize at a very grassroots level, and thrive in a world like this. And we know how to push technology forward. And so what I would encourage us all to do now, today, is that we think beyond screens, think beyond what our definitions of the web were as maybe we thought they were 5 years ago, and are changing today and will continue to change in the future. But know that as we go into this world, that we have a lot of skills that we've built over the years that directly correlate to success in this larger ecosystem. So, the world is getting more webbish. The web, less so. A lot of change coming, but I think that change amounts to a lot of opportunity for those of us at Badcamp, in Drupal, working on the web. And that is what I wanted to talk about today. So we have time for questions, and I'm happy to do so, and I haven't been monitoring the Twitter feed, but again, FutureWeb is the place I suggested conversations, because I'm not the only person who might have good ideas about this whole thing. Also, just before we take questions, I want to mention something sort of slightly different, but I would encourage, I don't know if anyone else has seen this slide today, but the web is a place that hasn't always been super great for diversity and technology as well. There is a survey that many folks are sort of pushing forward, including, I guess including myself. I would encourage you to take a moment, if you're interested in this as a topic, to check out, take this survey and help us all get better at it. But with that, I'll break for questions. Yes?
Do you think the argument over net neutrality is settled? Do you think that might be a force of the future?
So it's really hard to do. I think the argument of net neutrality has been settled, or
Is that going to be a force in the future?
yeah. So net neutrality. So question is, do I think net neutrality is settled? Is it a force in the future? Net neutrality is the idea that all traffic can pass over the internet at the same levels. So Comcast can't throttle Netflix and or Google and basically extort them for, no, Netflix, you're delivering too much content over our networks. You must pay a premium, and suddenly your speeds will get better. And there've been malicious sort of studies about at certain points over the last, I think, about a year. There's a really interesting sort of set of graphs about Comcast and Netflix are in a spat. If you looked at traffic of Netflix videos and the quality of delivery to households, they went down dramatically. And then they came to an agreement, unspecified, and all of a sudden, Netflix videos were really coming out well again. And this is the discussion over net neutrality. This is sort of like the subject that you would learn more about, or Google to learn more about this. Wow, you got me a stumper. I don't know, honestly. I'm not sure. I think net neutrality, the principle that all things should travel equally, it certainly has merit. And initially, my own feelings on this were unambiguously, all things must be equal all the time. There is something different about a Netflix that sends a lot of traffic over the internet. I'm going to give it an 80-20 on net neutrality over not. That's a hard one, though. Does anybody have an easy question?
Yeah, I have a question. So you talked about there being other interfaces besides digital screens.
Yeah.
You mentioned audio.
Yeah.
I can think of telephones, devices that make sounds.
Mm-hmm.
I really can't hear anything else that's, I guess, web connected.
Yeah, okay, so the question's about audio interfaces, and can you give another example, basically? Okay, so there's this one sort of gimmicky trick sitting on Dries' table in his house. So that's called an Alexa. Does anyone actually own an Alexa or a similar device? Cool, right, we've got at least two in the room. Do you like it?
It's a friend. Yeah.
Oh, friend. Love it. Yeah, I do not own one. I hear from people who have it, it's transformative and amazing. There's something a little bit curious about a thing that's always on listening to you. There's a privacy thing there. But people who have them really, really love them. But that's not the only interface that I think will be audible sort of first. I think if you're driving, for example, I think the world of the horrible interface designed by car manufacturers will fail before too long because it's ridiculous. But being able to speak to your car and say, "Car, I don't know where I'm going," or give me directions to wherever, and that being a very natural thing, I think is one obvious example. That's the one I think about the most. I think there are many situations though where, just abstractly, pulling out a thing and doing this is obstructive to the world around you. And so if, again, this is, bear with me, little future cyborgy, but a world in which there are unobtrusive things, maybe a monocle. The watch is halfway there, right, exactly. Where you can just interact with the world, quietly have a world with your digital sort of things, the cloud of things that you're accessing, will be less invasive than picking up something and going like this.
Yeah.
And I think with that, you know, like if you think of it in those terms, it will be ubiquitous, I think, especially as language recognition and processing gets better, and it's already great.
Yeah, well, like a Fitbit uses temperature and sense, I guess.
Yes.
Measure pulse.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it seems like web UI and web UX comes out of the web design and web standard.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, how do people in that area like influence UX for audio and touch?
By starting to experiment with it, by showing that we have the chops to do UX well, and thinking beyond screens. I mean, I think we're well positioned to start building things that talk in interesting ways, not just to mobile devices, but again, like there was an actual Drupal module firing off, talking to Alexa. Like that was real. We can build those things. We know how to build systems that talk to other things. And I should time check. I think we're about at time, and I see people filtering out. So I'll say thank you everyone for coming. I'll stay around for more questions as people happen.